Chosen one, stay with me for a moment, because something subtle but powerful has already shifted around your life. And that shift is the reason these words found you now. You did not arrive here by accident. This message did not brush against your day randomly. Heaven arranged this encounter with precision, because there are seasons when God does not speak to entertain your emotions, but to awaken your spirit to what has already begun in the unseen. And this is one of those moments. For a long time, you may have felt a strange quiet surrounding your journey. Things you hoped would happen did not unfold when you expected. Certain connections seemed close, then disappeared. Certain doors looked promising, then closed without explanation. At times, it may have seemed as though heaven had gone silent while your heart was still carrying questions too deep to name. But hear this clearly, that silence was never abandonment. It was preparation. It was preservation. It was the hidden work of God protecting a future too sacred to arrive before its appointed time. You are not being handled like everyone else, because you are not like everyone else. You have been set apart. You carry weight in the Spirit. You carry an assignment that cannot be joined to what is shallow, rushed, or emotionally unstable. That is why your process has felt deeper. That is why your waiting has felt longer. And that is why what is now moving toward you will not come as chaos. It will come as alignment. The partner heaven is sending into your life is not being released carelessly. This is not a random connection. This is not another temporary attachment dressed up as hope. This is a divine convergence that has been forming quietly while heaven was refining you in the places nobody else could see. As see is right. Lewis once wrote, "There are a lot of things ahead than any we leave behind." And that is the atmosphere over your life right now. What left was not the end. What closed was not failure. What did not stay was not meant to carry where God is taking you next. So before we go any deeper, I want to ask you something. Can you feel that this season is changing? Can you sense that something in your spirit has been preparing to recognize what is finally drawing near? If this word is speaking directly to you, comment 777 below as your declaration of divine alignment. And do not leave quietly like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share it with someone whose spirit needs this confirmation today. For a while, you may have wondered why so much of your life felt suspended in silence, as if heaven had gone quiet while your heart was still carrying promises it could not release. You looked around and saw delays where you expected movement, endings where you expected building, and emptiness where you thought fulfillment would already be standing. But what felt like silence was not rejection. It was not distance. It was not God turning away from you. It was concealment. It was holy restraint. It was the hand of heaven covering what was too sacred to be exposed before its time. Scripture says, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Ecclesiastes 3:1 KV. And that means even the quiet seasons have an assignment. Even the pauses have purpose. Even the closed spaces are working for something greater than what your natural eyes can measure. You were not being ignored in those hidden months. You were being preserved. There are things God will not release while your emotions are still vulnerable to what looks right but is not right. There are connections He will not allow to remain while your discernment is still being sharpened. There are doors He will not open while your inner life is still learning how to carry the weight of what you asked for. That is why this season had to feel different. That is why so much had to be stripped back. Heaven was not punishing you. Heaven was protecting the future from premature exposure. And if you are honest, you can already see that something in you has changed because of that silence. You do not move the same way anymore. You do not attach yourself so quickly anymore. You do not mistake intensity for truth the way you once did. There is a deeper stillness growing in you now. And that stillness is not emptiness. It is evidence. It is the sign that God has been doing his deepest work where no one could applaud it, where no one could interrupt it, and where no counterfeit connection could corrupt it. What looked like a delay was actually divine mercy. What looked like nothing was preparation unfolding in secret. And what heaven has hidden for a season, it reveals only when the soul is strong enough, clear enough, and steady enough to receive it without fear. Listen carefully, because this is where many people lose their way, not when something evil looks evil, but when something misaligned looks almost right. That is the danger. That is the seriousness of this hour in your life. What is approaching you from heaven will not feel like the chaos you survived before. And if you do not understand that, you may misread peace as weakness and confusion as passion. You may be tempted to reach for what is loud simply because it feels immediate. But immediate is not always holy. Intensity is not always true. And urgent is not always from God. Some connections enter a life like fire, but they do not come to warm the soul. They come to consume discernment, distort identity, and pull a person out of alignment before destiny has time to fully unfold. That is why this season is so serious. This is not just about romance. This is not just about companionship. This is about your calling, your spiritual stability, your future, and the weight of the assignment over your life. The wrong connection at the wrong time does not just wound the heart. It can drain strength, blur vision, delay obedience, and make a person question what heaven already made clear. That is why God did not allow certain doors to remain open. That is why some people disappeared. That is why some bonds broke even when your emotions wanted them to stay. Heaven was not being cruel. Heaven was intervening, because what is coming to you now must be protected from everything counterfeit, everything premature, everything emotionally intoxicating but spiritually empty. Chosen one. The connection being prepared for you will not demand that you betray your peace to keep it alive. It will not feed on your fear. It will not survive by keeping you anxious, guessing, chasing, proving, and performing. No. What comes from God carries a different atmosphere. It does not pull you into confusion. It settles you. It does not intoxicate your flesh while starving your spirit. It strengthens what God has already built inside you. See, Isnoka, Lewis wrote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, mere Christianity. And that is why the false could never satisfy you for long. The deeper hunger in you was never meant to be silenced by surface affection, empty intensity, or temporary comfort. It was always pointing towards something sacred, something weighty, something authored by God. So do not minimize what is happening now. Do not treat this like an ordinary emotional season. This is a threshold. This is a dividing line. And what you discern here matters. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from something that looked right because your spirit knew it was not? If this word is confirming what God has already been showing you, comment. I will recognize what is mine. What you survived did not just teach you how to wait. It changed you. It changed the way you hear, the way you see, the way you move, and the way you respond when something enters your life carrying the wrong spirit. Before this season, you may have been more easily moved by potential, by words, by moments that felt powerful simply because they stirred emotion. But God has done something deeper in you now. He has slowed you down. He has made you less impressed by appearances and more sensitive to peace. He has taught you that not everything that shines carries light, and not everything that feels strong carries truth. That transformation did not happen in comfort. It happened in the hidden places. It happened in the lonely nights, in the unanswered questions, in the long stretches where all you had was faith and the quiet discipline of remaining steady. And because of that, you are no longer who you were when this journey began. You do not need to be rescued from your own emptiness anymore. You do not need someone to arrive and complete what God has already been healing, strengthening, and establishing inside you. That is why this next chapter matters so much. Heaven does not unite two people so they can become each other's savior. Heaven brings two lives together when both have learned how to stand, how to breathe, how to remain whole in the silence, and how to carry responsibility without collapsing under emotional weight. Many people pray for love, but they are still starving for identity. Many people ask for partnership, but they are still depending on another person to tell them who they are. But that is not where you are now. God has been teaching you how to remain grounded without applause, how to keep moving without constant reassurance, and how to hold your heart in His hands instead of placing it in the hands of unstable people. This is why your waiting was not wasted. It was building capacity. It was creating spiritual muscle. It was forming the kind of inner stability that can sustain a connection sent by heaven instead of destroying it with fear, need, or emotional hunger. So do not look at your process and call it a delay. Call it transformation. Call it preparation. Call it proof that God was thinking far beyond your temporary feelings. Because the person who is about to step into the next season of your life is not being sent to heal your lack. They are being sent to walk beside the strength that God has already raised up in you. This is why you must stop reading your past losses as if they were only romantic disappointments. Because they were never only about love. They were about destiny. They were about protection. They were about God refusing to let your future be tied to something that could not survive the weight of who you are becoming. Some doors did not close because you were unworthy. They closed because your assignment was too costly to be joined to what was shallow, unstably, or premature. And that is where the seriousness of this season becomes impossible to ignore. The wrong relationship does not just break the heart. It can interrupt momentum, weaken discernment, drain spiritual authority, and attach your emotions to places your calling was never meant to live. Some people lost years not because they lacked gifting, not because heaven forgot them, but because they bound themselves to what felt comforting while it was quietly pulling them out of alignment. That is why God had to intervene in your story with force you did not always understand. That is why some endings felt severe. That is why some separations came with no explanation that could satisfy the mind. Heaven was not merely guarding your feelings. Heaven was guarding the future attached to your obedience. Heaven was guarding the clarity of your hearing. Heaven was guarding the strength you would need for what is still ahead. Scripture says, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry." Habakkuk 2:3. And Ife. That means what is truly written for your life cannot be forced, cannot be borrowed, and cannot be replaced by a counterfeit just because the waiting becomes heavy. If it is from God, it will arrive with its own timing and its own authority. If you had stepped into certain connections when your emotions wanted them, you may have called it love, but later you would have discovered it was interference. You may have called it companionship, but heaven would have called it distraction. You may have tried to preserve it, while all along God was trying to preserve you. And do not miss this, the person being prepared for you is also being refined under pressure. Their path may look different. Their fire may not look like yours, but heaven does not bring two lives together until both have learned how to stand under weight without folding into fear. This is why the delay was necessary. This is why restraint was mercy. This is why every closed door carried more wisdom than your pain could understand in the moment. So do not grieve those endings as though God took your future from you. He did the opposite. He protected it. He defended it. He kept your destiny from being handed over to what could never carry it. Chosen one. There comes a point in a divine process when heaven stops merely teaching you and starts clearing the ground around you. And that is exactly where you are now. This is not a small shift. This is not a sentimental moment. This is a holy rearrangement. And it is happening with more precision than you realize. God is not only preparing a person for you, He is preparing space for that person to enter without competing with what should have already left. That is why certain connections have weakened. That is why some conversations have lost their power. That is why places, patterns, and even environments that once felt familiar now feel strangely heavy on your spirit. You are not imagining it. You are not becoming cold. You are not becoming difficult. You are becoming precise. And precision is necessary when destiny is involved. Heaven does not pour something sacred into a life still crowded by unresolved attachments, lingering compromises, or emotional residue from chapters that have already ended in the spirit. God clears the room first. He removes what has completed its assignment. He exposes what cannot go forward. He loosens what your flesh might still try to hold. Because what is coming next must enter an atmosphere of peace. Not confusion, freedom, not entanglement, clarity, not emotional clutter. Some people were only meant to walk beside you long enough to teach you discernment. Some were mirrors, revealing wounds you still needed God to heal. Some were painful lessons wrapped in familiar voices. And some were never sent to stay at all. They were allowed to appear so you could learn the difference between attention and alignment, between chemistry and peace, between longing and truth. That is why you must not mourn every departure as if it were a tragedy. Some things did not leave your life because you failed. They left because God refused to let your future share space with what could contaminate it. This is the severity of the hour you are in now. If heaven is removing it, then it cannot remain. If God is drying it up, then it cannot go where you are going. If peace is withdrawing from it, then your spirit has already been warned. See, sight. Lewis wrote, "Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither mere Christianity," and that truth matters here more than ever. Because the moment you make a person, a relationship, or the fear of being alone into the center of your world, you begin losing the very clarity needed to receive what is truly from God. But when your eyes are lifted higher, when your heart is anchored in heaven first, you stop begging wrong things to stay. You stop chasing what God is already uprooting. You stop calling emotional residue by the name of covenant. And now, because God has been recentering you. He is also removing what would interfere with the peace of what He is about to send. This is not random loss. This is sacred clearance. This is God making room. So tell me in the comments, what has God been removing from your life lately? If this word is speaking directly to your spirit, command. He is making room. There is a pattern that appears just before heaven releases something real. And if you do not understand it, you may mistake revelation for disruption. Just before the authentic arrives, the counterfeit often circles back one final time. What you thought was buried may suddenly reappear. A familiar voice may return. An old connection may reach for you again. A door you once cried over may seem to crack open without warning. And for a moment, it can feel confusing, almost as if everything inside you is being pulled backward just when you were finally moving forward. But hear this deeply, this is not proof that you are lost. It is proof that your discernment is being brought into full light. God will sometimes allow the past to stand in front of you one more time, not to trap you, but to reveal how much He has changed you. What once felt magnetic will now feel heavy. What once looked exciting will now feel strangely hollow. What once stirred your emotions will no longer have the same power over your spirit. And that change is not small. That change is holy. That change is evidence that the refining did not fail. In an earlier season, you might have run toward what felt familiar simply because it was familiar. You might have called it hope when it was really attachment. You might have called it love when it was really the fear of emptiness. But you are not standing in that old place anymore. The fire you walked through has taught you how to hear beneath words. It has taught you how to sense what is off, even when everything on the surface looks almost right. And that is why this moment matters so much. The counterfeit does not always arrive wearing darkness. Sometimes it returns dressed like closure. Sometimes it returns dressed like another chance. Sometimes it returns dressed like the answer to a prayer you once prayed, but no longer need in the same way. That is why you must stay awake in the spirit. Do not let nostalgia speak louder than peace. Do not let loneliness rename what God already removed. Do not let temporary emotion reopen doors that heaven closed with mercy. The fact that you can now look at what once controlled you and feel clarity instead of craving is a sign of spiritual authority growing inside you. You are no longer being ruled by the need to be chosen, pursued, or validated by what could never carry your future. You are learning the difference between what pulls at your wound and what speaks to your destiny. And that difference will protect the next chapter of your life. So if something from the past has been resurfacing lately, do not panic. Stand still. Look again. Listen deeper. What is from God will bring peace with it. What is not will expose itself by disturbing the very calm heaven has been building in you. What is happening inside you now is deeper than healing. It is deeper than recovery. It is the restoration of authority. There was a time when being chosen by the wrong people could still shake you, when rejection could still make you question your value, when silence from others could still tempt you to chase explanations that heaven never asked you to seek. But that version of you is fading. God has been doing a work so deep in your inner life that your need for outside validation is losing its grip. You are no longer willing to betray your peace just to feel wanted. You are no longer willing to lower your discernment just to avoid being alone. You are no longer willing to call instability love just because it gives you temporary attention. That is not pride. That is not emotional distance. That is maturity. That is spiritual authority returning to its rightful place. There is a holy seriousness to this change. Because when a person no longer needs to be chosen by people, in order to feel secure, they become far more difficult for confusion to manipulate. They stop chasing what God is not blessing. They stop grieving things that heaven already judged unfit for the next chapter. They stop reopening wounds just because something familiar knocks on the door again. And that is exactly why this season matters so much. You are not just becoming harder to deceive, you are becoming ready to recognize what is true without panic, without striving, without fear. Scripture says, "Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God." 1 John 4:1. KV. That word is not a call to suspicion. It is a call to spiritual sobriety. It is a reminder that not everything that moves your emotions has been sent to carry your future. Not everything that feels intense is aligned. Not everything that returns deserves access. And because God has been sharpening you, you can feel that now in ways you could not before. You can sense when something is feeding anxiety instead of peace. You can tell when a connection demands performance instead of truth. You can recognize when your spirit is being drained. Even if your emotions are still trying to make excuses, that is growth. That is wisdom. That is what happens when identity becomes rooted in God instead of in human response. Chosen one, do not apologize for the boundaries heaven has built in you. Do not feel guilty for no longer entertaining what once distracted you. Do not call yourself difficult when all God has done is make you clear. This clarity is not blocking your future. It is protecting it. The person being aligned with your life will not require you to become smaller, softer in truth, or weaker in discernment to keep them near. They will recognize the strength God built in you, and they will not be threatened by it. They will not need your confusion to feel secure. They will not need your hunger to keep you attached. They will meet you in truth, in peace, in spiritual steadiness. So let the old need to be validated keep falling away. Let the old fear of being left behind keep breaking. Let the old ache to be chosen by people die completely. Because when you know you were chosen by God first, you stop begging for what no longer has permission to stay. If this is your season of holy clarity, write this in the comments. I will not return to what God removed. There is a part of the journey that almost no one talks about, honestly, because it does not look dramatic enough to be called a breakthrough, and it does not look painful enough to be called a crisis. Yet, it is one of the most important seasons of all. It is the quiet middle, the long stretch where nothing seems to be collapsing, but nothing has fully appeared either. No thunder, no visible sign, no sudden arrival, just ordinary days, ordinary prayers, ordinary faithfulness. And if you are not careful, you can misread this season and think nothing is happening, when in truth, some of heaven's deepest work is taking place there. This is where endurance becomes power. This is where faith stops living on emotion and starts breathing through conviction. This is where your soul learns how to remain steady without needing constant reassurance. There is a quiet fatigue that can settle over a person in this season, and you must understand it. Quiet fatigue is not the same as despair. Despair screams that everything is falling apart. Quiet fatigue simply whispers, "How much longer?" It looks like doing the right thing without applause. It feels like staying faithful when there is no fresh sign. It sounds like praying simple prayers because the heart no longer has performance energy. And yet even here, especially here, God is not absent. He is building something in you that excitement could never produce. He is teaching your faith to stand without leaning on visible evidence. He is training your spirit to hold peace without demanding instant answers. Many people lose heart in this stretch because they expected divine movement to always feel intense. But heaven does not only move in fire. Sometimes it moves in repetition. Sometimes it moves in routine. Sometimes it moves in the daily choice to remain aligned when your emotions no longer feel dramatic enough to convince you that progress is happening. But seeds do not shout while they are growing underground. Roots do not announce themselves while they are deepening. The strongest things God builds in a life are often formed where no one can see them. So do not dishonor this season by calling it empty. Do not accuse this quiet place of being stagnant. You are being strengthened in hidden ways. You are being stabilized in places the future will depend on. And while you have been learning how to endure without forcing movement, heaven has also been working beyond your sight, aligning circumstances, refining timing, and steadying another life at the same time. The waiting feels quieter now because it is no longer the waiting of someone abandoned. It is the waiting of someone to be positioned. And that changes everything. What you are living through is not dead space between promises. It is sacred ground where your strength is becoming consistent enough to carry what is coming next. Now you are standing in a different kind of season. And this is where many people misread the movement of God because they expect the final approach to feel loud, dramatic, and impossible to miss. But heaven often does its most precise work in silence. What is happening around your life now is not merely preparation anymore. It is positioning. This is the stage where God begins arranging details you could never control with your own effort. Schedules shift, paths narrow, distractions lose their grip, doors that do not belong start closing without resistance, and the things that once competed for your attention begin to fade. This is not confusion. This is convergence. Heaven is reducing what is unnecessary so that what is necessary can be recognized without interference. And that is why you must be very careful in this hour not to mistake readiness for permission to force movement. Yes, you have changed. Yes, you are stronger. Yes, you are more discerning than you were before. Yes, your spirit has matured enough to recognize what carries peace. But maturity does not give you the right to rush what God is still synchronizing. There is a holy restraint required in this season. There is a sacred stillness that protects the timing of what is being formed. Many people stumble here because they feel internally ready and assume that means they must act immediately. But there is a difference between being capable of moving and being instructed to move. There is a difference between a good opportunity and God's appointed moment. And if you move too early, you may not destroy the promise, but you can strain the foundation it was meant to stand on. That is why this stage demands humility.